Stone intelligence. Perth, sovereign state of Perth. WA is part of the...
Yeah, we get it already. We get it.
Well, I don't ask you, and you don't run the meeting. You're not going to dictate. I'm getting tired of you with your...
Well, we don't need a lesson. We don't need a lesson on Western Australia for crying out loud.
Alcoholics Anonymous because you're a drunk.
Here every 6 months or so, and as you know, Western Australia, it's inhabited by hayseeds and sandgropers.
That's it, sandgropers.
And it's a long way away. And a friend of mine who's running a group that's trying to get politicians around the world to agree on a common policy. It's called Simultaneous Policy. It was originally the headquarters were on this side of the continent. The old man that was running it sort of passed it on to him, and I said, before the last election, you can't go on with a Western Australian address because everyone in the rest of Australia thinks we're just hayseeds and sandgropers. He said, well, I couldn't get anyone to take the address. So a lot of people have a problem about getting an address, somewhere to live. So can I talk about somewhere to live?
You're pretty well over there, aren't you? You made so much money out of iron ore and that.
Yeah, but we're only hayseeds over there. It doesn't matter if we're in houses. What about the people in Melbourne and Sydney? They've got to have houses. They've got to be able to afford to get houses too. So I've got 2 or 3 points on it. Here in this city, some young people got going around, and they just did a few suburbs, and they called the program, I Want to Live Here. They walked through the suburb and went on push bikes and walked and rode, and they looked for vacant houses and vacant blocks of land, and guess what they found? There was room for several thousand more people to live in that suburb, which everyone thought was full up.
What suburb was that?
Now, they put it out, and it actually made an article in The Age. And guess what? This morning when I looked out of my palatial hotel room, there was all shops, but in the middle of it was all vacant, abandoned, horrible ground that wasn't being used by anybody. It was just rubbish land. Somebody's holding that land and they're not using it. So we've got to think, why is this so? How could someone who's a bit better off than most of us own land in a city of Melbourne? We're talking about central city. I'm only a block or two from here. How could someone hold that land and not have tenants on it, or not have shops or houses, or sell it or something? And so we come to the problem which I've spoken of here before. The problem that our governments don't realise this is a problem, and they think that it's all right for these people to just pay measly little bits of rates. They fuck like mad about the rates, and governments are moving to lower land taxes and rates instead of realising on vacant land it should be double. On vacant land it should be double to encourage them to use it. And of course, many of the younger people facing having to, if they're going to buy a house or even a flat, are asking for prices like 400,000, 500,000 for somewhere to live. This is ridiculous. So is there another cause beside vacant land? And of course there is. And so when they had an inquiry into this within the last few weeks, the Housing Industry Association chap called Silverberg, he said, we've had, for 3 years, we've had uncontrolled immigration, 250,000 people a year. He said, but these people they're not bringing in tradesmen to build houses for them. 250,000 people can't just sort of lie down on this grass each night. They can't duck under the bridges or sleep in the subway. 250,000 people is a lot of people. But unless you bring in tradesmen to build houses for them or do something, they're going to add to the pressure on rents. They're going to add to the pressure on buying houses. And so he claimed, I'll just read it out. He said that out of 250,000 each year, only 800 only 800 had the skills to build houses, building tradesmen and such. And he claimed that wasn't enough. Now there's a guy at the Housing Industry Association of Australia. You couldn't call him some kind of a racist or a redneck or a fool. Mr. Silverberg is none of those things. He was just stating some facts to a government inquiry. So that is the second reason, uncontrolled immigration. And guess what? The Howard clone who took over the new PM, do you know what his target is this year? 300,000. Crud wants 300,000. And he hasn't solved, and he can't solve the homelessness problem, the rent increase problem, the housing becoming unaffordable. He hasn't made the slightest attempt to solve it, except, of course, doing what Whitlam did, appointing inquiries. The answer has been given to these people for years by certain reform groups. There is another problem in society. I'll talk about that too, if I've still got time. Have I, Ronda? Are you seeing these articles about... Sorry?
We've got 19 million.
Another 10.
Nearly 20.
Thanks a lot for that. Now, there is another serious problem which helps to cause the problem if you think about it around. Just follow me if you can. This is the... You read occasionally news items about CEOs, chief executive officers, managing directors. So these CEOs and MDs, they leave their job after so many months or years and they go away. It used to be 20 million. Started off at 2 million, then it was 8. This last few years it's been 20. Then I read about one that was 60 and a letter to the editor went off. And now I've read about one, $80 million. So that's one guy going out of the company and taking $80 million with him. Given to him. He didn't steal it out of the safe. No, he didn't write a bodgy cheque. He was given to it by the directors.
Look on
the good side of it. You never have to get another job and stuff everybody.
That's right. He will never have to... You never have to get another job. I'll finish this one. And therefore he won't be competing against you unemployed people, so it's a good point. Good one. People like that can be competing, when there's an auction for a house or a block of flats or a flat even, they can be competing against you and me for the house. They help to drive the prices up. If there's shares being sold, they can snavel up huge numbers of them. If you're a little investor and want to get a few shares and try and lift yourself up in the world, they can be competing against you and buying them and ordering them quicker than you can. So the idea of giving someone 80 million when he's finished his job. Now here's something, another point on that same subject. There was a bank manager who'd spent a lifetime in the bank. I don't know whether he went in as an office boy or what. Anyway, he worked his way up, he became the top man in the bank. And when he retired, a few years later, he said, the last general manager who resigned got more every year than I earned in my whole life with the bank. His salary was more a year than he got in his whole lifetime working for that same bank. So something's wrong, and there is a cure. And the cure, you don't have to bring in the land tax or Georgism to get that cure. This was told to us by a former employee of the tax office. He said what has to happen is the Parliament has to make a law regarding income tax that a company who wants to pay anyone more than so many times the standard weekly wages in wages, they're not allowed to write it off as expenses. You know how if you're running a business, wages are an expense, so it lowers your income tax. You understand this, do you? Any of you run a business?
So how come they don't pay us more?
When you're running a business, you're making profits, income the profits. Against the profits, you set expenses. You've got to pay rent and lights and wages. So this chap reckoned that if the tax laws were made so that when they're paying ridiculously high wages, they're not allowed to treat them as coming off their balance. So they've got to pay tax on this fuller amount, a bigger amount. So this was a solution put to us by a friend of mine, by a tax office employee. And
all right, thank you. Now we're asked for the next speaker now. Come on. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to bite you. I know I'm told I'm a witch. And the only reason why I don't